We're beginning to take a look at Tier 2, Managing Challenging Students. In PBIS and what is now called MTSS, which is Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, Tier 2 is our students who are periodically having chronic behaviors, but they're your office frequent flyers. They're your students that, with a combination of management and good interventions, can turn around and they can get into the mainstream of things. So let's get started. In multi-tiered systems of support, Tier 2 is part of a school-wide program. This happens when the school has made a commitment. They have teams in place. In PBIS, this was typically done at year one. You identify your school-wide model, your school-wide plan. As a school, you've set positive expectations and you've taught these behaviors to all students. I have posted some examples for you so that you could take a look at what it looked like in the couple of schools I've been in where we were rigorously applying the PBIS. In the school, there's a continuum of procedures that help students to reach your behavioral expectations and encourage the expected behavior. Sometimes in the school I'm at now, we have tiger tickets. The kids get tickets for appropriate behavior. Some kids, it's the caught you being good, but there's some type of positive reward system in place to reward expected behavior. There's also a continuing procedures for discouraging those inappropriate behaviors. So you've identified your practices, you've identified what students should be doing, you've taught them what they should be doing, and there is some type of consequence for inappropriate behavior that's in place. Then school-wide, you also have procedures for ongoing collection and use of data for decision making. For many of us who went the PBIS route, we have the Swiss reporting system. We still use ours rigorously. Some schools use Skyward or PowerSchool to report and take a look at the data. Another intervention practice that would be in place is in the classroom. In the classroom, the teachers are teaching to the expectations. They're encouraging them to have pro-social behaviors throughout the school. I hear a lot of complaints. Oftentimes in teaching this course, people say the rules are reinforced differently. Well, this is where the schools come together and said, these are things that are not okay, and these are things that we want to see, and they're reinforcing those things they want to see and have consequences in each classroom for things that are not following the rules. The teachers are also given a ratio of 5 positive to each 1 negative adult student interaction or feedback. So there's praise, there's lots of positive statements. I like the way you're sitting. I love the way you were walking. Thank you for turning in your homework. So you're acknowledging the pro-social behaviors you want to see. And then if you have a negative interaction with that student, you're keeping that minimized. The classroom teacher has a functional physical layout that includes space for think times, brief timeouts, perhaps quiet learning space. They've made arrangements that prohibit students from running in a classroom or not being able to have proximity to your students who are challenging. The key component in the classroom is effective academic instruction and curriculum, because as we know, the kids who are engaged in actively learning are far less likely to act out than students who are bored and have other challenges. Multi-tiered systems of support require individual student planning. You have personnel with behavioral competence that are available at the school and district levels. If you're in a small rural school, oftentimes these these two areas are challenging to have people that are in that role that can help you. You have functional-based behavior support and planning. We'll take a look at that functional-based behavior planning a little bit later when we hit Tier 3 in this class. You have team and database decision making. So you have a team that's meeting, discussing the student, how they're progressing, taking a look at their data on a real regular basis. We meet every other week currently at our school to discuss our Tier 2 students and take a look at the data and see if we need to make any changes to the intervention. You have a comprehensive person-centered planning and wraparound process. This means that you may have involved the previous teacher, you may have involved parents, you may have involved the child's counselor. Sometimes people bring in outside services. You may bring in their case manager from CPS, you may bring in the guardian ad litem, but you have a wraparound process where you're taking a look at the whole student. In Tier 3, this process can include, for example, when I had the behavior classroom in Boise, we had a psychiatrist that I met with on a monthly basis and went over all the students and their symptoms, their medication, any medication side effects. For the individual student, you also have targeted social skills and self-management instruction. So you're having a teaching component so that the student is able to learn new skills. Because if we sat and told a student, for example, that was having a struggle in mathematics, what not to do and what they did wrong, but we never taught them how to do the skill or to kind of incorporate problem solving, they would not make gains. It's the same way in behavior. Social skills have to be taught, self-management instruction have to be taught, and oftentimes, especially with our students of poverty, our students of trauma, these skills are essential in helping them to become students that are in Tier 1 and self-managing. The last part of the individual student plan or intervention practice that your school should have in place if it's embracing PBIS or multi-tiered systems of support is individualized instruction and curricular accommodation. So you, for example, perhaps the student is going to the resource room for part of the day to self-manage, or there is an accommodation such as the child's able to lay a card down on the table and take a brief break. But there's individualized instruction and curricular accommodations, at least at that Tier 3 level. If you're practicing PBIS effectively or multi-tiered systems of support, there's also a non-classroom component where positive expectations and routines are taught and encouraged. Oftentimes this might look like having your playground supervisors or your teaching staff train the kids. What does the behavior look like in the hallway? What does the behavior look like in the cafeteria? What does the behavior look like passing during periods, getting materials from your locker? There's also active supervision by all staff. Everybody's scanning, moving around, interacting with the kids so that the students have the feeling that everybody's on board. We're all taking a look at what's going on in the school, and we're all helping to provide corrections or praise or a helpful suggestion. There's also pre-correction and reminders. This might take the form of giving the kids the instructions prior to an assembly of what good behavior looks like. Perhaps reminding them that we're going to be dismissing today at 1:30. Please walk in the halls. The last component that's going on throughout the school is positive reinforcement. All the adults are on board with letting the kids know when they are meeting our behavioral expectations. A big complaint of students that follow the rules are that all the rewards go to the kids who are naughty, quote naughty, and that they're never told they're doing a good job. They just have to keep doing it, and there's no praise, there's no rewards or reinforcement. They don't get to go have lunch with someone special. And sometimes that's fair. All students who are behaving appropriately should receive positive reinforcement and praise. Another important part of a whole school PBIS or MTSS system that's working is family engagement. We all know that if you don't have the families on board, you rarely can get the kids' behavior in check. So for family engagement, you want to continue on with positive behavior supports for all of the families. You want that frequent, regular, positive contacts where you're communicating with the family and you're acknowledging when the student is behaving appropriately, you're celebrating those little victories, and then you're also partnering with them as you try to correct and move that student's behavior into more Tier 1. This also becomes important in our Tier 3 because the students will have behaviors that are more risky for the school, and sometimes we're asking parents to come and get their kids. Sometimes we're asking parents to help us by taking them to outside providers. The last component of family engagement is an access to a system of integrated school and community resources. We're fortunate we have a full-time school counselor. She's really good about helping the students access counseling services, behavior supports, and in my years in the behavior classroom, oftentimes, we were having conversations with St. Alphonsus behavior, and we were having conversations with the student's psychiatrist, and you want to have a good positive connection that the parents can access when they're looking and seeking help for their child. Tier 2, or our secondary interventions, incorporate about 5 to 15% of our student body. It should only be a small portion of our students who are at risk. We should have a high efficiency. The students should be able to get training, some prevention activities, an extra eye on them, an extra monitoring system, that the response is rapid. There are some small group interventions taking place. Perhaps it's friendship group, perhaps it's second steps social training, perhaps it's learning how to interact with their peers in a positive way, or coming up with some coping strategies. But in this percentage, our goal is to get our Tier 2 students into the Tier 1, to where the majority of the students are behaving. If you look down the progression of the pyramid, and they invert the pyramid, because really the biggest portion of students are going to follow the rules. And Tier 2 supports address those students who are unable to. One of the questions we often ask is, which comes first? 80% of all students who were identified as having severe behavior problems were also identified as having academic problems. So again, if we have students who have behavior problems, we need to take a look at their academics, and perhaps what's happening is we have academic and behavioral interventions simultaneously. I had a young man in my behavior classroom who came to me as a 4th grader. He actually was enrolled on my birthday, and I'm going to tell you, for the first 3 months, it didn't seem like much of a birthday present. Every day I tried to teach that young man to read. He would tantrum, hit me, throw things, and for 90 days we introduced reading and wouldn't take that off the table, and just slowly by slowly, when we had taught that young man to read, the behaviors went away. it was his way of trying to escape a difficult task. And that academic piece was essential in stopping the behaviors, and it frequently is. Another essential component is the progress monitoring. Oftentimes, we don't keep adequate data that let us really see what the antecedents to the behavior are, or what consequences are maintaining behavior. So we want to make sure that in a good PBIS or MTSS system, that there are things in place, teacher rating scales, ABC data sheets, office referrals that go into the Swiss reporting system or Skyward or PowerSchool, and that you're regularly taking a look at monitoring that. And if you flatline in your strategies, if the behaviors are not improving in duration or frequency, then you want to switch them up. And that's a key component. There are some strategies that I list a little bit later that'll kind of help you know some things you could try different, but that's a key component as well. You're going to use that data to take a look at student outcomes. You want to make decisions that are effective when you're planning those remedial interventions. You also want to take a look at determining those appropriate research-based interventions for students with behavior problems. If you'd like a good resource, if you go on OSPI site in Washington State, they actually have a best practices menu for behavior. That's an awesome resource that just kind of helps you take a look at some of those research-based interventions that work. And of course, I'm going to list multiple ones as we move through this PowerPoint slideshow. You want to identify students with behavior problems early. You want to make sure that you're preventing unnecessary identification of students that perhaps a short intervention or finding out that it's a short period in the student's life of trauma or some type of trigger that is likely to, with the right connections, pass. The other thing that we really have to be careful for is over-identification of students with disabilities. Oftentimes, we have our students with disabilities who are over-identified with behavior challenges because, again, they lack the academic skills in the classroom, and sometimes you want to look at other things like accommodations and modifications rather than full-blown behavior planning to help them and meet their needs. Also, there's a percentage of students who we need to take a look at. Do they have a disabling condition? It was always hard. I used to have to introduce myself as the emotionally disturbed teacher. But oftentimes your Tier 3 students end up with a label such as that. You hear EBD classroom, emotionally behavior disturbed. But the bottom line is that some students have disabilities and mental health challenges that they really need special services and special programs to meet their needs. In multi-tiered systems of support, prevention is the key component. You want to make sure that you're decreasing the development of new problem behaviors. You're preventing existing problems from worsening. You're taking a look at the learning environment to eliminate triggers and things that are maintaining problem behaviors. And then also there's a component where students are being taught and monitored and acknowledged for their pro-social behavior. After all, the behavior that you prevent from occurring is the easiest one to manage. The study of Marzano also in the area of discipline factors in PBIS and MTSS. One of the foundations is that in all the studies, pretty much any intervention that was tried across 5,000 students, 200 comparisons, and 99 studies, what they found is 4 out of 5 children will respond to a behavioral intervention of any kind. So if you take your Tier 2 students and you design a behavior intervention and you put it into place, 4 out of 5 of them will fall into line and become your Tier 1 students. It's not that they may not require future management, but it'll be decreased, and you won't be seeing the amount of office referrals for those students. And if you take a look at that, if you have, say, 50 kids who fall into this Tier 2 category, and you know that 4 out of 5 of them with an intervention can move to Tier 1, what you're saying is that you can move 40 of those 50 kids to having good pro-social behavior through just the use of employing an intervention. And I always found that fascinating, but it's true. It seems like if you put something in place, 4 out of 5 of them will behave. As we take a look at interventions that we would like to begin or put into place, there are some guidelines or kind of foundations. The first thing is that you identify the students who are needing that additional support for behavior through some type of a team meeting. Sometimes it's a teacher referral. You select an evidence-based intervention that is appropriate to their level, to what the student needs. You're going to provide an intervention that's easy to administer and requires limited time and staff involvement. It's typically made by the school's planning team, and Tier 2 support's most effective when there's a process that allows the plan to collect data, work with the student's team, and then include people that have specific expertise in the intervention program being considered. One of the most common things that fail in a PBIS or MTSS system is that you really do have to have a team, and the team needs to meet regularly. You have to be in regular dialogue about these kiddos, and you have to be taking a look at the data and discussing those frequent flyers. You're taking a look at new kids who might be in need of identification. You're taking a look at current students that you have and how they're responding to intervention. And you're taking a look at students who are ready to exit the monitoring program and try self-management on their own. And you're taking a look at the times of your building that you're having the most struggles. You're taking a look at areas that maybe is more likely to have some behavioral challenges. And you're taking a look at what you can do to put preventative support in place. So for example, at our school, we noticed 2 o'clock recess was when we were getting most of our office referrals. So we put in place extra support during that 2 o'clock recess. But then we also had to take a look at the location. And as it turned out, putting people out on the playground wasn't really reducing the office referrals. Well, when we looked at the location, part of it was because what was happening is it was the kids lining up after recess bell had rang. So we could put preventative measures in place. We wanted to make sure the teachers were there to collect their kids timely. We wanted to make sure that the kids, we had gone over the behavioral expectations for what was happening in line. We upped the amount of positive reinforcement for kids who were doing the appropriate behavior, and then we began taking away some recess from the kids who were struggling, and that reduced that time frame problems in half. One of the things that we'll take a look at as we look at Tier 3 is this antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. There are a lot of questions that you need to know the answer to if you're going to prevent problem behaviors, and what's happening right before the behavior, what's the behavior that's occurring, what's the consequence, or what's happening right after the behavior that keeps maintaining this. And so we'll take a look at a lot of factors, and you'll be able to apply them to Tier 2 as well. Just you won't need to do the formal documentation of going through a functional behavior assessment. For some schools, they use this 4-step model, They define the behavior. What's the problem? They take and analyze why do they think the behavior is happening. They develop a plan. What shall we do about it? And remember, again, any plan will, 4 out of 5 of those students, the behaviors will decrease and they will become more appropriate. And then they'll take a look at, did the plan work? Are the students now involved engaging in pro-social behavior after the intervention, or do we need to try something else? And this is a pretty easy 4-step process that you can use for your team meeting that's systematic and helps teams decide what to do with their more challenging students. Now to the exciting stuff. When you have these Tier 2 kiddos, what can you do? And as an administrator, people look to you, and this is one thing they do want you to have the answers on. They want to know, what can they try that they haven't already tried? What can they do to help prevent these behaviors from happening? What can they do with the students that are chronically misbehaving? Small groups are a wonderful way to help students gain those pro-social skills, friendship classes. Sometimes it's listening skills. Sometimes it's training them in the rules of the school, but it's a small group with a caring adult who's trained to help students learn those new skills. You can have different forms of behavior report cards, behavior contracts, check-in, check-out, and this helps the student and the teachers and staff to track the student's behavior throughout the day. They check in with a caring adult in the morning. They carry a behavior reporting card during the day. They check out with a caring adult at night, and their data is checked and looked at and tracked over time. Another effective strategy is transition feedback and supervision. In the elementary school, it's wonderful because oftentimes our younger kids can be supervised during these transitions by our older kids, a 5th grader or 6th grader, who can take them to the playground, who can walk back with them to class. And same thing applies in junior high and high school. The older peers can provide that supervision, feedback, and during those difficult transitions for some of our littles. Some Tier 2 strategies now include yoga. We had a great response to yoga that was taught by a master level social worker who came to our school, and that was the only intervention. And another Tier 2 intervention is mentors and the mentoring program. They can be other students. In our school, we use our ASB students as mentors on the playground. I was at a school where for tribes, we had peacemakers who helped students to solve their challenges. At the junior high, oftentimes you can find mentors and older children. A lot of the kids who are in honor society that need to have additional hours can help you out. There's also a lot of research that say students that learn to self-monitor their own behavior, that goes well. We usually do that as part of a behavioral checklist so that there's an adult check on that. And then discretionary movement breaks has had great success for those kids who sometimes are chronically truant, who tend to go to the bathroom frequently, who aren't where they're supposed to be, that giving them, for example, the one time recently that I used it, we gave 3 popsicle sticks to a student, and throughout the day he could put one of them in the cup by the teacher's table and he could go to the restroom or go get a drink of water. But there were 3 of them for the entire school day. And so a discretionary movement break sometimes helps students who are having difficult time staying on task or being where they're supposed to be. More Tier 2 interventions, frequent progress monitoring. And oftentimes if you couple that with reports to parents, including concrete suggestions on ways they can help their child to be successful, and some parents respond better to that than others, but it usually takes a pretty good relationship with the parent first before we're suggesting how they can help us be proactive. But let me give you an example of things we talked about. A student who doesn't get their homework returned. The concrete suggestion to the parents is a backpack check before they go out the door. Another time we used that recently was we had a student who was stealing items from class. And so our regular report was that when the child had gone through the check-in, check-out, and we hadn't had that happen in quite a while, we asked the parent then to be that second guest, that they would go through the backpack when the child got home. And so you can just give them little tips on ways that they can help their child be successful. Hugs is a check-in, check-out program. And again, we'll cover that more extensively. But it helps you're basically saying hello to the child. You're taking a look at their day, and at the end, they're checking out, and we're taking a look at how did they perform throughout the day. Group contingency rewards. According to Eric Jenkins at the University of Utah, who wrote all the Tough Kids book and the Tough Kids Principles handbook, he says group contingency rewards are highly effective in motivating students. I give you a caveat though. I have tried this with your Tier 3 students, and if you have somebody who's oppositionally defiant, they will intentionally tube the rest of their group. So it works okay in a Tier 2, but not always in a Tier 3. And what that looks like is perhaps it's a table pod. If this table is able to line up independently, get to their next class timely, then they get a point. And so many points they earn a super point party. But it's highly effective according to the data. I think rewards charts probably pretty self-explanatory. Behavioral contracts we've all used. Verbal cueing is when you're giving a verbal signal for the behavior to cease or discontinue. Oftentimes when I'm training my students, I'll explain to them, when I look at you and I say no thank you, please stop what you're doing. In visual cueing, you might have, for some students, the teacher will tap their desk. They'll stand close to them. There's social skills training, role-playing, modeling. Those are typically done by trained counselors and professionals that lead at that in small groups. Cognitive behavior therapy, again, is typically a trained individual, but it's helping the student to learn problem-solving skills, how to rethink and reframe the situation, and how to cope when things are not going well. They use a lot of talk out louds. I've done a lot of the cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's teaching kids kind of becoming that voice in their head that helps them to talk through the problems they're having. Visualizations, I'm sure that's self-explanatory, teaching them to take a look at self-monitoring and self-evaluation and giving them feedback on how to do that. Typically, that coincides with the check-in and check-out and the daily behavior monitoring, but eventually the student can take a look at their own behavior and determine whether or not they're meeting the expectations. And of course, that's the goal, ultimately, is the students are independent. Mentoring is highly successful, self-talk. And again, that usually takes a cognitive behavioral approach, but it teaches the students how to talk themselves through a problem. Students with autism, we do this using social stories, teaching them how to run that script that they know how to behave. And then just plain teaching the desired behaviors for kids who don't know exactly how to follow those rules consistently. Positive reinforcement, according to Marzano, will result in a 31% decrease in disruption. And if you couple that with a mild punishment, of course, the efficacy is almost 50%. The research supports the use of mild punishments. You'll decrease another 28% when your punishment is being used, and and I don't mean that in a negative or physically punitive way, but you get a 33% decrease when a reward and a punishment are used, and when coupled with self-monitoring, you'll get an almost 50% reduction in inappropriate behaviors. So let's clarify what punishment is so we're clear. It's the opposite of reinforcement. Like reinforcement, there's two types. There's a positive punishment and a negative punishment. Positive punishment includes, for example, think time. You hand the student a piece of paper that they have to fill out, and if the behavior decreases after that practice, positive punishment is effective. Negative punishment, an example might be a response cost. You have a student who's having challenging behaviors and you have a token economy system. If they have to pay a fine when the behavior occurs and the behavior reduces, well, then negative punishment's being effective. Something that is used in society for us is the adding of a ticket. That's positive punishment. You get a ticket. If the speeding behavior decreases, it's been effective. A negative punishment example would be you lose your driver's license and the behavior decreases. Well, I'll let you figure out whether that was a result of not having a car or that negative punishment was effective. If you're using positive punishment, some examples are detention, think time. Have the parents come in and spend some time in the classroom, although I've never been sure whether that's punishing the student or the classroom teacher, but detaining a student in the classroom for a minute, not giving them an excused tardy for another class. My favorite is, and it's part of the restorative justice practices, is community service cleanup. And so where the student has to wash baseboards or windows or walls if they've done something to deface them, where they have to help the teacher prepare lessons if they tore up their papers. I mean, that sort of restorative justice seems to be logical and it makes sense to the kids, and it does seem to be effective in helping reduce the problem behaviors. Negative punishment is when a stimulus is removed. Some examples are isolation during lunch. They lose treasure chest or ice cream, or a super point Friday in the upper grades. It might be the 5 minutes of electronic time on Friday. You remove the student from the room. You exclude them from a fun learning activity or a field trip. They have to have a silent lunch, sit near a teacher during the lunchtime. You've taken away their peer interactions. Maybe they lose some type of free play. Take a break for the same amount of time that they're talking. All of us do that. Kids are talking, you make them put down their head for a period of time. Now they tell us to use punishments and rewards together, but I have a caveat for you. There are times when punishment's warranted and the student needs to have a consequence, especially repeat offenders, and if in the case of defiance or disregard for safety. But I will say, once a reward is earned, we do not take it away as punishment. We need to find something else for punishment. I had a student that I had a hard time finding a reinforcement for in my Tier 3 behavior classroom. And I had a para that had been out on maternity leave, and I had a substitute for a period of time. And this student had worked for several weeks to earn the reward. And the substitute, in a moment of haste, took away that reward as the punishment for a behavior. It took me a long time to find anything else that student was willing to work for. And it set that student back quite a bit in their academic performance, because getting them to engage in the work product was torture. It took me 5-6 weeks to get that back on pace. So just a word of caution there. Home contingencies will decrease problem behaviors by 21%. Think of coupling that with effective punishment and reinforcement, and you can make some significant reductions in problem behavior. But effective home contingencies are a partnership with parents to improve the student performance. I had one student who literally all I would have to do is call dad to get the behaviors to cease. And when I first got him, this kiddo was throwing chairs, overturning tables, and we were able to partner with the parents, and that parent was able to talk that student down before the classroom was destroyed on just about 9 out of every 10 times, and it was fabulous. But I've also done the opposite. In my experience, alienating a parent damages that student-teacher relationship. Once the parent is saying things about the teacher or the administrator, it's challenging for the student to have a good relationship or a good outcome in that case. They don't oftentimes respect the teacher, and so bringing that parent on board is critical. Troy University did a big study, and they took a look at how to successfully partner with parents and work with them. And they offered some of their staff a script, and this was kind of these were the bullet points. You take the first step. You have a specific request in mind, so you might call the parents and, hey, I wanted to ask if you might be able to help Johnny remember to keep his hands to himself at lunchtime. We had a little bit of a challenge, and could you visit with them a little bit? And they recommend that you don't do it at a time when you're angry, that you're not making that phone call at a time that the tone of your voice is going to serve to alienate the parents. You also want to give the parents a chance to be heard, and believe me, I understand that sometimes parents are advocating for their child, and it gets uncomfortable because sometimes parents are excusing the behaviors of their child that are not appropriate. But we listen to the parents' thoughts, take notes, be reflective on that, and our goal really is just to see their perspective. And I try to err on the side of, they just love their child, and I get that, but we all want to partner to make their child successful, and I hope that comes across in my conversations with parents. Return your parent calls promptly, and what I learned as an administrator is that parent calls I did not return promptly became the office visit I didn't have time for. Send a delivery confirmation letter in the mail after you've spoke. Gosh, it was so great to get to talk to you about partnering with little Johnny's success, and thank you so much for helping us out with the backpack check at home. We appreciate it sincerely. And on everything you do, I had just a notebook that sat beside the phone, and I just documented every parent conversation, and I used that documentation repetitively. Additional suggestions for the parent conversation is try to meet with them face-to-face. And in that face-to-face meeting, it's just the facts. You state the facts. Out of the first 20 days of school, the student didn't do their math homework 10 different days. Out of the first 20 days of school, that student has missed 7 days of school and been tardy 5 times. It's just the facts, and it's not emotional. And I say that because I've heard so many times when having a conversation with a parent, one of my teachers would say to the parent, well, they were just thinking they could get away with this. And parents get really upset when you're telling them thought processes that are going on in their child's heads frequently. At least that's been my experience. So I try to stick to non-judgmental facts and just say, look, your student, when we had a substitute teacher, left class and did not return for the entire duration. And the rules say, and you just restate what the rules are, and then in the form of a request, I need your student to serve after school detention. I need your student to serve 2 Saturday school detentions. So present your request and get the parent on board with supporting that decision, hopefully. If you help parents feel successful about their children, I typically have found they're more willing to work successfully with you. This was always shocking to me, and when I learned in Tier 2 management that you'd get a reduction in inappropriate behavior of 24% in your Tier 2 for no immediate consequence, but just reminding the student of the inappropriate behavior. And we have a 6th grade teacher that just is masterful at this. She will go over and stand at the student's desk when they're off task, or they're leaning back on 2 legs, or they're trying to talk to a neighbor during her teaching. And all she says to them is, what are you supposed to be doing? And it is amazing to me, and then keeps right on teaching. And for the bulk of, 1 out of 4 times, she can keep right on teaching because the inappropriate behavior stops. Think time is highly effective strategy. I think we've all been at schools one time or another where students were given think times. In the upper grades, typically that is more of a slip that goes to a detention officer or a dean of students. But think time, or what Jensen called in Tough Kids Toolbox, he called it other class timeout, where you're sending the student out of your classroom with a think time to another teacher who is receiving them and giving them time to analyze their disruptive behavior. It kind of breaks that cycle too, and of the students' misbehavior, especially if they're involving other students. And quite frankly, there was times it just gave me a minute to take a deep breath and not want to throttle them. Some schools in Tier 2 practice assertive discipline. And like most of our other strategies, there's about a 1 in 4 response rate in your Tier 2 behaviors, so about 25% will respond positively to assertive discipline. In my experience, for every one that responds positively, you have one on the other end that's a frequent popper who the assertive discipline almost increases their behavior. But let's go through assertive discipline. It's that idea that there's a sharp distinction between rules and directions. You listen to directions, you follow procedures, but you do not violate rules. Off-task behavior requires you to repeat the directions, and if you have disruptive behavior, it's a rule violation. You act swiftly and assertively, and that kid is in the hallway, they're in think time, they're giving you recess time. The punishment is immediate, and the student is just quickly and calmly called out. It emphasizes positive consequences for appropriate behavior. In assertive discipline, there are 5 steps, and some of them line up nicely with the love and logic. You establish that positive climate. You have a good rapport with the students, but they know who's boss. The teachers learn the difference between assertive and non-assertive and hostile behaviors until it becomes habitual. So it's something you practice I've read a few of your discussion posts, and there's quite a few of you who use the assertive discipline frequently in your classrooms. The assertive teacher responds to convey disapproval in a firm, unemotional, businesslike manner, and they're telling the student what they should be doing. And I always think a great example is the Love and Logic "Turn Your Words to Gold" statements that they give us in a book. The third principle of assertive discipline is you establish firmly these limits and the consequences, and then you signal the students that they're approaching a limit. Some rooms have a green, yellow, red. Many rooms in assertive discipline, there is no 2 reminders to 1 punishment. It's each time, every time you follow through on the consequence. And you implement a system of rewards for positive behavior, such as you get to work in a group. You don't have to sit next to the teacher. But they're oftentimes not tangible rewards. They're rewards of classroom responsibility. The teachers in assertive discipline, it's important to make eye contact. There should be some type of a physical signal. In my case, my physical signal was a snap of my fingers, and the eye contact and the snap would let the student know, all done. And then there's a verbal reminder. Like I said, for the one teacher, our 6th grade teacher has a great job of just saying, what should you be doing? And that frequently works. Sometimes people just restate the rules, and sometimes it's as simple as, are you monitoring your own behavior? Repeat the rules and expectations, you cue the behavior, and you tell the student to stop. Additional Tier 2 strategies are caught you being good, tangible recognition, the Tiger tickets, student of the week, good peer and teacher attention through compliments, through posting work on the board, or nominating the student for some type of award. Token economies. Token economy systems tend to be more valuable in Tier 3, and it's not to be used as a bribe or a coercion, but just some type of intangible recognition or token that is tied to a future response or reward. So, for example, in my classroom, my Tier 3 classroom, I used dimes and dollars. I wanted the kids to be able to count money, and so we had plastic coins that they could earn. They'd earn a dime, and then they could be converted to dollars, and those dollars on Friday would give them access to a student store. In some of the inner city schools, they have student stores that kids earn tokens throughout the school in various capacities, and at the Friday store they can buy things like school supplies and little trinkets. Another Tier 2 strategy is called overcorrection or direct response cost. It is oriented towards a negative consequence, but it's kind of a penalty for behaving in a way that was inappropriate. So there's an explicit or direct consequence. Sometimes it's, all right, you're in the hallway for your behavior. But oftentimes it's an overcorrection that's used. You need to go to the end of the hallway and walk all the way back correctly. You tore up the paper, you threw it on the floor, you're going to be vacuuming the floor during your lunchtime. You wrote on the school wall, you're going to be scrubbing down the school walls for the next several days. And that direct response cost is part of the effectiveness of restorative justice practices. Again, we talked about group contingencies. Those are great ways to improve whole class performance that are kind of subtle and a nice first step if you get kind of a difficult to manage class. And if you have a teacher who feels like they have kind of a lot of at-risk students in their room, group contingencies are wonderful. You pair the students in teams. Perhaps the students give themselves a name, a team name. Teams earn points for who's fastest to begin the task, who stays on task, who keeps their voice level at a indoor tabletop voice, and it's interdependent. Every student in the group has to maintain or meet that behavioral expectation, and it's dependent on all the individuals in the group to meet the standard and gain the reward. There's a lot of positive peer pressure to behave appropriately, and it's always a great first step in Tier 2. Tier 2 behavioral documentation includes ways to have the student check in, again with that caring adult, take a look at their behavior checklist for the day, and kind of keep track in the record keeping. More behavioral interventions for Tier 2 that are research-based are mystery motivators, where I see teachers do this, where they put marbles in a jar. When the jar is full, maybe the students draw something out of a basket. Maybe it's 5 extra minutes of recess, or it's bring your pillow to school day, or I even saw this very effective at the junior high and high school, at pajama day. You can bring a pop to class day, things that they're not usually allowed to do, as a mystery motivator. Behavior contracts, those home notes, self-monitoring, response cost raffles where your students are earning tickets that they put in a jar that you periodically pull out. Another effective strategy, especially in upper grades, is home notes, where the student brings home a note every day or a behavior graph, and at home they receive a reward. Perhaps they have access to their phone, or they have access to a television, and with the flip side of that being that they have a response cost, or they don't have access to those things if they bring home a note that is derogatory. Number one most effective Tier 2 strategy is check in, check out. Some call it the HUG program. It's a plan and a process that allows students to check in, carry a tracking form, ask their teacher to rate their behavior, check out with a caring individual at the end of the day, take that home to their parents, and come back and receive some type of recognition in the morning. So it might look like this. In the morning, the students check in with the counselor. Sometimes it's a preferred teacher. They have a great greeting. You want to see, do they have their lunch money? Do they have their homework with them? How are they feeling? Was there anything going on last night at home or in the morning? You're collecting the form they had signed by their parents and giving them some type of token reward. I used to give kids a chocolate kiss. I know another school that gave the kids a small Tootsie Roll, and I know some kids that just got a high five. So you have verbal reinforcement, and you give them a new hug form for the day. During the day, the students give the form to their teacher. You've all seen these. The teacher rates the students' behaviors, and they indicate a brief comment to the students if they have time. Great job getting started. Specific positive feedback. And it can also be negative. The student just couldn't focus and did not return to the task. And it's across all settings, so that even the specialists are rating the student behavior. At the end of the day, the student takes the form to that caring adult they check out with. They get that positive, sincere greeting. So it's a place they want to go. They might receive a small reward if they hit they're within their goal range. Maybe their goal is to reach 90%, 80%, and they put their forms into their backpacks, take home and share with their parents, and then the parents are asked to give the children positive feedback, sign the form, and put it back in the child's backpack. If you look online, there's quite a few sites that'll give you access to behavior tracking forms. See Me, the Tough Kids toolbox has a lot of those posted online that are very helpful. So Tier 2 behaviors, to wrap it up, are ones that you put in place for 10 to 15% of the students who are at risk of academic and more behavioral failure to live up to your rules and expectations on a chronic, regular basis. These are kiddos that you want to put an intervention in place. You want to get them behaving like the mainstream students in the classroom, and we want to get them to engage in pro-social behaviors throughout the school setting. There are some references of additional materials that you might enjoy checking out. A good site for some additional interventions is pbis.org. There is our government site that is the ies.ed.gov, and the What Works site. Again, I told you the Washington State OSPI site has a menu of best practices for student behavior, but I found many states post those as well. Again, Safe Schools is another great resource, and then your psychologist, your behavior teacher in your school, they're all great resources to go to if as an administrator you're looking for suggestions to help a student get back on track. Your assignment is to read through our PowerPoint and then to come up with 10 things that you have done for your students who are that 10 to 15% chronic, challenging behaviors, to help turn them around, and things that you have seen work in your practicum, in your classroom, in your school setting, or if you haven't been in the school setting before. I know we have one person coming from outside in a science field. Then take a look online and see what you can find that to help those Tier 2 students turn around and intervene in a positive way. Thanks so much.